this. Okay. First of all, assalamu alaikum to everyone. We're going to open up in prayer first. Prayer. Allah is the greatest. Allah is the greatest. Allah is the greatest. Allah is the greatest. Oh Allah, we seek that refuge from anxiety and grief. We seek that refuge from lack of strength and laziness. We seek that refuge from cowardice and niggardliness. We seek that refuge from being overpowered by death and the oppression of men. Oh Allah, suffice thou us what is lawful. Thou keep us away from that which is prohibited. And with thy grace, thou keep us free from want from that which besides thee. Amen. Now I'm going to put everybody on listening mode. Okay. If you all can't hear me, just send a text message to let me know if you can't, but I think we have it set up properly. So he needs about 10 minutes before he comes on. So we're going to let me do this. Okay. Can we let's do a roll call. Who all do we have on?
Brother Corey in Charlotte.
Sound like my brother Corey.
Brother Verb, Monroe, Louisiana. Brother Verb.
Brother Bourbon from Monroe. Brother James Muhammad. Brother James Muhammad, Orlando, Florida. Sound like my brother James.
Sister Lilia, New Orleans, Louisiana.
Sister Lilia.
Brother Kenneth from Rochester, New York.
Brother Kenneth from Rochester. Yes, sir. Others will be coming on out send the text messages out. So, brother wanted to give him a couple of minutes before he actually comes on. But while we have a few minutes, I don't know if you all have had the opportunity. Some of you all haven't missed the opportunity to actually be on these calls. Does anyone want to take a few quick moments to talk about how are you all finding these calls beneficial?
Yes, sir. This is Brother Corey in Charlotte. I'll start off. I'm finding them beneficial in the labor that we do to help in this great work. The Student Supreme Captain always said the biggest room is room for improvement, and we know that the Supreme Wisdom and the original rules and instructions allows us to continue to practice our labor, qualify ourselves, for our labor, letting us know that we are able to, be students and get better. So from what Brother Student Minister Hughes shared, he shared some wonderful information from what Brother Student Minister Carlos shared a couple of weeks ago. And in terms of specifics, I like to take notes on the phone call. I won't go over all of those, but I literally, jot down notes from that. And all of us, I'm striving to get better, and these calls are definitely helping me put some of these things into action that I'm learning.
Sir, thank you, my brother. Anyone else?
Yes, sir. Some like Brother Kenneth, definitely finding the cause beneficial. The only hiccup that I'm having is trying to keep up with the assignments and get those completed. But the calls have been dynamic. The call that Brother Hugh did, we immediately instituted some of the lessons that Brother Hugh taught about, just the structure, working with the staff, and so we put that to work immediately. We've seen a big difference since we've been doing that. So I find them very beneficial, brother, and we thank Allah for you having the insight to put such a cause together for us. Thank you.
All praise is due to Allah. Anyone else?
Brother Lauren.
Yes, sir. Brother Lauren. Thanks, Lauren. We were just, brother asked to give, he's going to come on at about 8:10. We just want to give everybody as they come on, if you want to share how you're finding, what benefit you're finding from these calls. Anyone? I'll say this. One of the things, oftentimes when we have the opportunity to be with other student ministers, we often talk about the joys, the challenges, and even those who have an aspiration to want to be in the ministry. You have the opportunity to let people know that sometimes is a great reward, but it also comes with its challenges. And, the more I've heard from, like, the Dr. Wesley, from the aspect that he brought, Brother Carlos, Brother Hugh, and tonight we're going to hear from our brother from Memphis, who's a part of the research team. And, the more I talk with him, I just realized that what the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan said once about how every problem that we have in the Nation of Islam, the solution is in the problem. And we have the brothers and sisters who are going to be giving presentations on this call. They have, they have a wealth of experience. Some of them have been blessed to share be around the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan for a great extent of time. And it's little bitty nuggets that the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan may just share with them just in conversation, but it can be of great benefit. It is of great benefit to us, and I wanted to give us the opportunity to have an opportunity to learn from them. So this is what we're talking about is going to be tonight. Brother Demetric is going to talk about what he says, pastoral care. And if you remember what the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan said to the ministry class once, he talked about how, I think it was also in the ministry guide, the one that came out, that it's one thing to be able to teach, but we also need to learn how to provide pastoral care, and that's the type of work that takes place not on the roster for the most part. And so Brother Demetric actually, Allah bless him, to put together a book, titled When You Get in Trouble, Nurse from the Holy Quran. It's pastoral and spiritual self-help for Muslims, So that's one of the things I'm excited about tonight's call, so that we can grow in our effort to help the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, which is, also to help our community and help our nation. And we have brothers and sisters in our community that can do that. So let me see. Brother Demetric, are you on? If he's on.
Brother Willie, this is Brother Vervin in Monroe.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I did get a chance to read over the material, and I did find, in the material, the pastoral care, well, it's more than, being on the rostrum. It's actually dealing with people who have, emotional concerns, or they having a bad day. You have to be able to listen a lot when you are in, in the ministry. Also visiting the sick and shut in. I've been, trying to do that more, especially with the pioneers, with our, with the elderly community, for those who don't come out, and actually going beyond what the captains or the student coordinators have to do in terms of their responsibility as being a Muslim. So as a study group coordinator or minister, student minister, we try to find out what's actually going on with the individual. And that's part of that care that I picked up out of that, and I thought that was very interesting. And all of the topics have been interesting. I think we need more of this to continue to develop in the Nation of Islam.
Yes, sir. And Brother Kenneth mentioned about, I was doing these follow-up assessments, but I know that can be a lot for a lot of people. So we're just going to stick to, the pre-reading material. So, when you have the opportunity to read it, because you can find benefit from it, just like we just heard from Brother Verb, and he talked about what he got from it. So you have the opportunity to read those articles and see what you can find out of them, because it can be the answer to something that we are actually personally facing. So what I'm going to do now, our brother is ready. Let me place everyone on mute, on listening only mode. Okay, so we have our brother from Memphis and Brother Demetric. I'm sending you the code that you can click to enter the calling when you're ready. So there's a lot that can be said about our brother, but he's a brother, you know. He's a defender and helper of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. He spent time putting together that, gathering all of the articles of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and you see him posting some of them on social media if you follow him. You know, so definitely, man, let's we really look forward for what our brother has to say. So you're on, my brother?
Brother Willie, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Oh, thank you, brother. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, I bear witness that there is no God except Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is his messenger. I bear witness that Allah appeared in the person of the great Mahdi, Master Fard Muhammad, and that he raised from among us his messenger Messiah, the exalted Christ, the most honorable Elijah Muhammad. And I further bear witness that their divine reminder, servant, and one among us is Allah's messenger today, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. I greet my brothers and sisters in the greeting words of peace and paradise of Assalamu Alaikum. I first of all want to extend my great gratitude and appreciation to my brother and friend, Student Minister Willie Muhammad, for having really a brilliant idea to convene student ministers on a conference call to discuss best practices in the ministry. It's really a beautiful application of what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad has taught us when he says that 8 to 10 of us who are of like mind should come together and pool our resources. Now, oftentimes we apply that in an economic sense or business sense, but this is an application where we are being given the benefit of sharing knowledge with one another so that we might be better servants to Allah, his messenger, and to our people. And I sent Minister Willie a text a couple of days ago, and I said to him he must have been guided in scheduling me for tonight because I felt that it was a good time, seeing as how we were blessed to spend 3 days with the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan at the beginning of this week in conference and consultation with him as he readies himself for that which has been dubbed the crowning event of Black History Month, the anniversary of the birth of our Savior, Savior's Day in Detroit, and he is very excited to come before the believers and for the world, and having some of the behind the scenes of his message, I think is really going to be one of his most powerful yet. And of course, we all know that the minister always elevates his performance, and every message that he delivers seems to take it to a higher and higher level. But I thank Student Minister Willie again, and I thank everyone who is called in tonight, and I pray that just as a brother and a colleague that we can just share just a little bit about the importance of pastoral care as student ministers in the Nation of Islam and for the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. The notes that I have that I'll be kind of discussing, I'm not going to read it verbatim, but we created a PDF, and I sent it to Minister Willie before this call, and he can email it out to any interested brothers and sisters who may want the notes from our brief presentation tonight. The first thing I wanted to say is we always like to begin if we can lift words from the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, and I like to read a quote from the minister on the subject of pastoral care. The minister says, "We must now commit ourselves not only to deepen our understanding of the message, but grow into pastoral understanding of how to pastor or nurture the followers. When this evangelical spirit brings them in, then we must pastor them into being themselves, which is a process that begins with the bearing of witness that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger." And it goes on and on until we become one with God. And you can find that quote on page 2 of the booklet that we were given entitled, "In That Day, Your Righteousness Shall Sustain You." So the minister certainly is expecting us to develop, and I think as Student Minister Willie mentioned as he was getting the call together, we know that only about 10% of the ministry is at the rostrum where we are evangelizing and seeking to, quote unquote, make converts. I want to begin with a story about my personal life that has really attuned me to the need and the value of pastoral care in our nation. It has to do with the passing away of my father, my biological father, maybe about 3 years ago. And I was asked, along with my brother, to eulogize our father. And it was very difficult for me because my father, when I was a teenager, it was the first person to introduce me to Islam. He introduced me to the nation. He didn't continue being a registered member of the nation, but he always supported me as his son and my growth and development in Islam. And so he remained a giant in my own personal life. So like many of you on this call who've all experienced loss, it was a great blow to me. And I did not believe at the time that I would be able to really stand before his casket and talk about him and hopefully comfort the family, because quite frankly, I needed comfort myself. But what was, I think, a challenge for me was that none of the Muslims from the mosque came to pay respects to my father in his passing. And for a while, that really bothered me because I've always been the kind of Muslim that every time the doors of the mosque were open, I tried to be there. And being in the ministry and not being a baby in Islam, I understand the challenges and idiosyncrasies and the opportunities for improvement of our nation. But on a real personal level, it bothered me. During that experience, I don't know if Brother Willie talked anything about my background, but I work professionally as a chaplain, and I oversee the practice of Islam in 3 correctional facilities in the Mid-South area, 1 local, 1 county, and 1 state. And so I have colleagues that are pastors and other members of clergy, and we all do our best to come together to minister unto the needs of our brothers and sisters who are incarcerated. And so several of my professional colleagues from the Christian perspective, they came to show their support for me during the passing of my father. And one particular pastor actually sit in the pulpit with me, and he had a very comforting presence. And he did things to kind of take my mind off of it, cracking jokes and just doing a lot of different things to help me get through that august moment, very difficult moment for me and my family. And at the end of that experience, it really gave me a lot of time to reflect over the great need in our beloved nation for pastoral care. Because one of the things that it did for me in the relationship of that particular pastor is that it made me closer to him, and it also made me to look beyond other shortcomings that he may have, that other people may criticize him for, particularly because he was present for me in a time of need. And the essence of pastoral care is spiritual leadership being available for believers during their time of need. And so this subject is very important. And so that kind of began my study of it. And as we are students of the ministry, sometimes our own life is the inspiration for taking up a particular study. And so we developed a volume, as Minister Willie talked about, called When You Get Into Trouble, Nurse from Your Holy Quran. I'm sure everyone on this call knows that that is the title of a quote from the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad to Minister Farrakhan, wherein he told him, said, brother, not if you get into trouble, but certainly when you get into trouble, nurse from your Holy Quran. Just to go to something of the origin of pastoral care in our nation, I list the history of the Savior and his departure from the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, as we have been taught it. When he departed from the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, he pressed into his hand a piece of paper that had on it the 23rd Psalms, which all of us are familiar with, that says, and it begins, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And so conceptually speaking, the very term pastor and pastoral care emerges from the idea of spiritual leadership, being shepherds of men and women of faith, like a shepherd is in charge of a flock of sheep or lambs. The Holy Quran says in Surah 5, ayat number 54, O you who believe, should any one of you turn back from his religion, then Allah will bring a people whom he loves and who love him, who are humble towards believers, mighty against the disbelievers, striving hard in Allah's way and not fearing the censure of any censurer. That is Allah's grace. He gives it to whom he pleases, and Allah is ample giving, knowing. Now, there's a lot of good information that circulates about pastoral care, and at the end of this short presentation, we'll make just a few recommendations, but, it just starts with picking up a good book on the subject. A lot has been written about pastoral care from the Christian perspective. As the dominant religion in America, they certainly have quite a bit of experience dealing with congregations and flocks of men and women of faith. One of the working definitions that we include in this presentation says that pastoral care is an ancient model of emotional and spiritual support that can be found in all cultures and traditions. It has been described in the modern context as individual or corporate patience, in which trained pastoral care providers support people in their pain, loss, and anxiety, and in their triumphs, joys, and victories. So we developed this idea that, as the minister said in his quote, there are essentially two major parts of our ministry. That is evangelism, that is, fishing and helping brothers and sisters go through the process of getting an X and becoming a registered member in the nation. Evangelism, the spreading of the word, proselytizing, the preaching of the word, as the minister said when he came in the nation, to taking the message to every nook and cranny in America. That's evangelism. But now once we get a man or a woman to accept a life of faith, everyone on this call knows that your personal life does not automatically smooth out and there's smooth sailing just because you take your shahada or you get your X or you get baptized or you get off the mourner's bench. The life of men and women of faith, the life of the believer is a life of ebb and flow, and it is a life that the Quran teaches us is often a life that includes adversity and suffering. And so those of us in the ministry familiar with these kinds of concepts, and so in the Nation of Islam, all of us bear witness that we have a greater need for the pastoring of the believers. Part of this is important is because it will help us to retain the fish that we catch. It's a very frustrating life as a fisherman. If you put your fish in a net and then you come to find out that there's a hole in your net and the fish are escaping out of the net, and then they flop around and get back into the sea of sin. Sometimes the absence of adequate pastoral care can represent a hole in our net. Sometimes men and women who have been in the nation for long periods of time, going through the various seasons, or as the minister termed it in the study guides, the vicissitudes of life, I think was the phrase that he used. Life changes. We go through life change, marriage, and having children, and sometimes, unfortunately, divorce. And then there's retirement, there's old age. And so at every stage of life of the believer, they look to spiritual leadership for support, for encouragement, and oftentimes pastoral care really boils down to just our presence. Some people call it the ministry of being, being with believers when they need us in times outside of just a Sunday, Wednesday, or Friday night lecture. In some of the notes, you'll see that there are different suggested roles and functions. I'm not going to read through them all word for word, but some of the pastoral care functions that some of the pastoral care seminaries discuss. Pastoral care workers are to be aware of the boundaries and the limits of their role. We're not advisors per se, not to help people solve their problem or come up with a solution to their problem or to tell them what to do, but to help them understand the principles of our faith and of the teachings and what we believe so that they can find and develop their own solution to whatever problem they may be facing. They become advocates to those who are in need. Pastoral care workers, they work within the boundaries of privacy and confidentiality. And I think all of us know that. Some of us are Dianetic auditors, and we know that even in Dianetics, which is a aspect of the pastoral toolbox that we now have available to us as student ministers in the Nation of Islam, we know that there's an auditor's code where things that are shared with us are shared in confidentiality and not to be repeated unless there's the threat of the loss of life or limb or property or so forth. Pastoral care a lot of times involves working with other disciplines relevant to the needs of that person. I know over time, and I'm sure many of us have come across this, we bring people into the mosque who have a set of needs that, quite frankly, we cannot service or help. Most of us do not have mental health care workers, and so sometimes the homeless come in or brothers and sisters come in, and we may not be able to help them and minister unto them. So we have to be able to know where are the resources in the city or the community that we reside that we could point a brother or sister to. Likewise, it is when brothers and sisters come with legal problems and legal issues. Some mosques have attorneys. Some mosques have attorneys, and they may not specialize in whatever the need that person has, but we need to be networked with community resources until such time comes where the Nation of Islam can have its own set of social service resources and halfway houses and women's shelters and so forth and so on. Pastoral care involves being a facilitator, helping a person find their own way. A little bit later on in the presentation, I'll share some of what the minister shared with me very recently on that aspect. The next section I want to talk about is delegation. If you read the history of Paul in the Gospels, you know that Paul was a tent maker. He did not derive a living solely from his ministry. And so depending upon which denomination or which source you're reading from, you come up with a term that describes a lot of ministers in the Nation of Islam, and that term is bivocational or tent making or tent makers. Sometimes they're called worker priests, or this definition says non-stipendary ministry. In other words, they may be a minister by day, they may be a plumber by night. They may be a minister by day, they may be a barber by the evening. They have two vocations. So oftentimes being a bivocational or tent maker, a worker priest, if you will, we find it difficult to find time to devote to providing pastoral care, especially as the membership in the study group and the membership in the mosque begins to grow. We may struggle with finding time in our week to be all things unto all people, as Paul also said. So you have this concept of bivocational ministers, and so this brings me to first of all, the scripture. Well, first of all, what the minister shared with me as I was discussing some of my thoughts and ideas about pastoral care with him. And he mentioned to me what he used to do when he was a young minister. And he talked about how he had so much care and love for the believers that he apportioned out a day where he would just sit and hear the problems and concerns of the believers. And it would wear him out. It would literally zap all of his energy and all of his zeal. He couldn't do anything else because being a very spiritually sensitive man, he could feel the pain of those who were hurting. And so he said the Honorable Elijah Muhammad told him, he said, brother, I didn't send you there to do that. I sent you there to preach Islam. And Islam is mathematics. And if you preach Islam in a proper way, you help the believer with the ability to solve their own problems in a mathematical way. And so that reminded me of Moses from the scripture. Moses was similar, but Moses had a wise father-in-law. Moses' father-in-law was Jethro. It's intriguing to me, at least, that some of the Islamic scholars see a parallel between Al-Khidr, who was the wise man Musa followed in the Quran, to Jethro, Moses' father-in-law in the Bible. But Moses would sit and hear all of the problems of the children of Israel, all day, trying to help them solve their problem. And his father-in-law, Jethro, said, look, man, these people are going to kill you with all of the different cares and concerns that they have. And so Jethro was the one that essentially advised and directed Moses into the development of a captain structure, where he said you need to find wise and stout men from among the children of Israel, elders who could be over tens, hundreds, and thousands, and let them deal with the cares and concerns of the individual believers. If they come to a scenario that their wisdom is incapable of helping them to resolve, then they refer those cases to you. So essentially, Jethro advising Moses to delegate much of his pastoral responsibility. And so those of us who have to have the responsibility of being the minister over the mosque, as well as having a quote-unquote 9-to-5 job, or we run our own business and we have to do that for a livelihood, one of the best ways to cover all of the various pastoral needs of the believing community is to develop your ministry staff into also being a pastoral care team. And so some of the areas that can be delegated that are important areas of pastoral care is, of course, spending time with new believers to help them retain and stay active in the mosque, janazas or funerals. I thank Allah for Student Minister Anthony here, who I assist. And, he's also a bivocational minister, wherein he's a minister over the mosque, but he also has a job that he works to help support his family. And so over time, that helped create a lot of opportunities for me to get a lot of experience in pastoral care and filling in when he was not available, or when he was, or may have been occasions where, there was pastoral care needed for multiple scenarios. And so we've done janazas, funerals, weddings, hospital visitation, graduations, recognition. It should be noted that pastoral care is not always about being around for crisis. We are inspiring through the delivery of the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad men and women towards achievement in their own personal life. And so brothers and sisters, they get promotions, they get recognized on their job, they have graduation of their children. And these are occasions where, as Minister Farrakhan's local representative, as student ministers, we should try to be there or delegate someone who can be there. Of course, there's marital counseling, there's the visitation of their family members in prison, there's the care for the sick and the shut-in. So Brother Anthony actually utilizes 4 of us as assistants. And so we are able to, by Allah's grace, to kind of take this huge challenge of being available for a multitude of believers and kind of break it down among a small team. And, you know, if I'm not available, then there's Ilya Rashad, there's Brother Andre, Brother Rodney, of course, Minister Anthony. And so it has worked for us here locally to be able to provide better, adequate pastoral care for the brothers and sisters in our mosque. And I would also say one of the things that I have developed a passion for just over the last year or so that I think is a critical area that we need to focus some attention on are the children of the believing men and women. And I say that because as a chaplain, it's heartbreaking sometimes to see the children that you saw grow up in the mosque on the other side of prison bars. And you wonder, what could we have done? You know, there are always young people who want to go and experiment with this world's life, and this world's life appears sometimes to be very attractive and titillating. But taking an interest in the children of the believing men and women, I think, is an area of opportunity for those of us in the student ministry that will not only help the young people who are growing up in the mosque to stay in the mosque, but it also helps us with the necessary, I would say, capital that we need to deal with the believers. In my experience with Pastor Davis, he built a lot of personal capital with me. And that becomes important because sometimes we struggle in the student ministry with being adequately viewed or properly viewed by the believer. And I can just say, when someone shows up in your life in a time of need, then that person can damn near do no wrong after that. Now, as student ministers, that might be important, an important thing to consider, you know, because sometimes we are the victim of backbiting or slander. And so if we have built up pastoral care, I say, gives us an opportunity to build capital with the believer. The same principle is at work when the minister teaches us that as we go among our people in the black community, to essentially provide pastoral care for them when their loved ones are shot, when there's a case of police brutality. We should be there and do what we can for our people, because when the enemy comes with his flood of propaganda, slander, and lies, those brothers and sisters who have benefited from our care and concern, they will be, as the scriptures say, when it says that the earth opened up and swallowed the flood to help the woman escape to a safe place with God, her and her child. So there's a real tangible benefit, I should say, if we need to look at it that way, in investing more time and energy into pastoral care. And so some of the tools that you'll see in the notes that Brother Willie will send out, of course, first and foremost, is the Self-Improvement Study Guides by the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, which I believe are being republished and will be available at Savior's Day. There are some other titles here, certainly Dianetic Auditing, which is something that the minister wanted us to become practitioners of. It is defined as a form of spiritual counseling and of a pastoral nature. And you'll see some other titles here that you may want to avail yourself of when you get the opportunity. And the last thing that I included in these notes was a hadith from Prophet Muhammad that kind of helps to make an exclamation point on the subject of pastoral care. And it's from the Hadith Qudsi, which, as you know, are the sayings of Muhammad that are actually attributed to Allah himself. So in other words, it's what Muhammad said that Allah said. And so in one of the Hadith Qudsi, it says that, on the day of judgment, Allah will say to the son of Adam, said that, when I became sick, you did not visit me. And the son of Adam will say, "O Lord, how can I visit you and you are the Lord of all that exists?" And Allah will say, "Did you not know that my servant so-and-so was sick? And did you not know," and you did not visit him, rather. He said, "Did you not know that if you had visited him, you would have found me with him?" So that, I hope I didn't take up too much time, Minister Willie, but those are just some of the notes that I wanted to share on the importance of pastoral care. And I pray to Allah that we have shared something that is added to all of our collective growth and development. And so I turn the call back over to the hands of our great brother and friend, Student Minister Willie Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam. All praise be to Allah. No, brother, you said a lot, man. I'm going to tell you one thing that you said that struck home to me. You were saying about how significant it is that when someone comes to your aid, comes to be there for you during your dark hour, during an hour of darkness or great trial. And it made me think about, I learned that lesson during Hurricane Katrina. So you're right on point. And I thank you for also pointing out how pastoral care is not just during moments of crisis, So I definitely appreciate that. So for those who are on that's listening, are there any questions you would like to ask our brother about what he said? If so, you just need to press *6 on your phone, which will unmute you, and you can ask our brother a question. And I really encourage us to take advantage of, the brother while he's here on the phone. Is there anyone?
Assalamu alaikum, Brother Minister Willie.
Alaikum salam.
This is Brother James Muhammad in Orlando. And assalamu alaikum to you, Brother Demetric.
Oh, alaikum salam, Brother James. How are you, sir?
I'm fine, by Allah's grace. Good to hear your voice, dear brother.
Likewise.
What I would ask of you at this time, considering the blessing you have of receiving counsel from the minister, and the astute historical knowledge that you've garnered in the post that you've been operating in, particularly as a research minister. I've been in the nation, as you know, 46 years. And I've watched, all praise is due to Allah. And I've watched, if you will, the evolutionary approach to pastoral care. And as the minister has said on occasion, that when our people would sin and the registered brothers and sisters would fall victim to the law, the only recourse that we would apply is to expel them from the group. You see, and the minister said, because we weren't qualified to heal them or to offer them the kind of guidance necessary that they could develop strength. So we had to get them out from among us so that they would not infect others with their weakness. Do you see now, dear brother, an evolutionary approach to the pastoral care as compared to that in the past, where we now are not so hasty
in expelling them from the group, as it's very illogical for us to think that if they could not be strong when they were among those who were striving to be righteous, how then could we expect them to be strong away from those who were striving to be righteous and have them cast back out into the world? So do you see eventually a different application of the consequences of falling victim to the law as opposed to just putting people out? And that's my question, David.
Well, I would say yes and no. And what I mean by that is this. There is an aspect of the way the law has been applied in the Nation of Islam that is in and of itself a radical departure, as you well know, from the way the law is applied in the East. And Master Fard Muhammad, to whom all praise is due forever, his work was to save all of us. Some of the things that would give a member of the Nation of Islam time away from the society would mean death in the Islamic world. So the law as it has been, when it is properly applied, is filled with the mercy and the love of Allah. Even from a clinical or a professional perspective, oftentimes individuals who are dealing with emotional trauma, who may be having a crisis of faith, individuals who may be going through something personally in their life, a spiritual care or psychological care practitioner may advise them to take a hiatus or to take a sabbatical leave or to take some kind of a retreat. In other words, recuse yourself from your day-to-day activities and go for healing. So I think what the minister would really like to see is the Nation of Islam be able to have more to offer to our brothers and sisters who may fall victim to the law, not because they wanted to willfully break the law, but because we live at the time of the zenith of Satan's evil. The Quran says it will be the overspreading of evil.
Yes, sir.
So Satan, since he has stepped his game up, I mean, think about crack and what we now know about the scientific nature of such a wicked substance that binds itself to the melanin in human beings who have high concentrations of melanin.
Yes,
so
sir.
That even when they have the heart, even when they have the desire and the will to get off crack, it has chemically bound itself to their very biology. And so here's a man that's inspired by the word. He wants to submit to the word, but he's got a huge monkey on his back. And of course, we know that faith is so powerful that most of the time people can kick it overnight. But then there are cases where something may happen in their life of a crisis, and they reach for that they used to reach for before they came to faith, and now they have, in words, fallen off the wagon. If the nation could say, well, brother, now don't you come to the regular mosque meetings, but now you come over here and you spend time with Dr. Muhammad, Brother Muhammad, some brother or sister or team of brothers and sisters that can help you through what you are going through, while we keep the mosque and the study group, in words, for lack of a better expression, spiritually quarantined from whatever you are suffering as an individual. We don't want that to be spread, and we don't want to communicate that behavior is acceptable. but at the same time, we love you and we care for you and we want to help you and give you resources and tools to become strong again so you can re-enter society, whereas now we may give you time away from the society and we take a hands-off approach and we leave you just to, work through whatever your challenges are on your own. So I would say yes, there has been an evolution, but I don't foresee that the mercy that we are already being given by Allah in dismissal to be done away with.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Yeah, brother.
Thank you, Brother Demetric. Brother Demetric, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, I can hear you.
Brother Hugh here. First of all, thank you very much, my dear brother, for your presentation. And I thank Brother Willie again for his insight. Just very quickly, I was going to ask you, I know you're very, very good at teaching, and Brother Willie, the teacher. I'm going to ask, how do you teach the subject matter to your assistants? Is there a format that you use in helping them to understand being the pastoral care and how to help? What do you do, or what does Brother Anthony do to help to those that you have working with you in the pastoral care department? I really think that's very beautiful. Is that same like the ministry class that we try to have, or they're different when we talk about ministry class and pastoral care? How do they differ? How are they similar? How do they relate with each other?
That's a beautiful question, Brother Hugh. Well, I would say it like this. I think it starts with communicating to anybody. Brother Anthony always, you have to write a letter. If you want to be in the ministry class, you have to write a letter and express, why you want to be in it. And, he's never been one to just take anybody to just, say, I want to be in the ministry class. You got to express why you want to be in it. Then he communicates essentially, the truth of the situation. You may feel that, you are capable in delivering the word, and you may be, but if you really want to grow and evolve to ultimately take responsibility for a community of believers, that's a serious endeavor. And most of it is done away from the rostrum. Most of it is not in the hour or 90 minutes on Sunday that we could consider limelight, where people are bearing witness and saying that's right and go ahead. No, you now have brothers and sisters who have needs for spiritual leadership and guidance. And so, he has just over time, guided us, using various tasks. Like I said, I remember the first time I had to do a funeral of a believer. And, it was an experience because, like many of us, Brother Hugh, we think we're going to live forever, so we don't really let nobody know we want a janazah. So the mosque minister have to come in and try to figure out, okay, the family's in charge and they want a regular funeral, so how do I figure all of this out, to give this believer, at least some dignity that they would have wanted, but they didn't specify, so nobody really knew they wanted a janazah and so forth and so on. So he just would give us small tasks over time, and guide us in those tasks, and monitor and watch and see if we did it well. If we did it well, then we could do it again, and so really looking at the ministry of a mosque as this huge, for lack of a better expression, as they say, how do you eat an elephant? So now the needs of the believing community is this elephant, and oftentimes even for those in the ministry, and I should say this, even if you're full-time in the ministry, you don't have to just be a minister that works a job, but even if you're full-time in the ministry, it's still a good idea to divide up, the needs and all of the different functions that the believers have amongst the team of assistants. I would also recommend, as is in a lot of scenarios, the elders. You look at a situation, I don't know if he's been on to present, but I know Brother Patrick in Miami is in a unique situation because I mean, he had some of the greatest elders that anybody could want, and Minister Thomas Sahar, Minister B.R. And a lot of us in these cities, we have, powerful elders, and they really looking to be utilized to get in the game. They got a life worth of experience, and utilizing them as a part of the pastoral care team, is a wonderful idea, because when you actually have someone who have lived the life of a Muslim for decades, and here is, John and Jane X that just got the X 6 months ago. I mean, my God, how much could they benefit from hearing from some of our pioneers? Just, hey, brother, I've been through that. I did that and I made these mistakes. Don't you do this. So I did that, and this is what I did to be successful. So, in a lot of ways, pastoral care is not rocket science, but I think for us in the Nation of Islam, it's about looking at it and attaching more emphasis to it and more importance to it, because we all bear witness, because of the context of how the Nation of Islam has been born in America. And that context has been one of struggle, one of strife, one of having to fight against the government and fight against Negro leaders and fight against the church. So we have been so outwardly focused. We have been so evangelistic to spread our message, to defend our message, to make sure that people understood our message, that pastoral care has not always occupied the place of importance in our priorities that it should. But one other way of looking at it is this: there has been no greater preacher of Islam than the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. And so every believer that comes as a result of his voice represents his harvest. They represent that which Allah has blessed him to produce as a result of crisscrossing America and the world, working himself into bad health, traveling hundreds of thousands of miles. So as his laborers, we have to take special care to ensure that his harvest is not lost. And oftentimes that can kind of help us to see more of the importance. But I think that, just communicating, Brother Hugh, with those that aspire to the ministry, that, hey, this is really more than just opening for 5 or 10 minutes on Sunday and preparing a lecture outline. I think it begins
Yes,
there.
sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, beloved.
Thank you, beloved.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
Brother Demetric, this is Brother Tremont in Birmingham. How you doing?
Tremont who? Never heard of Tremont before. From Birmingham? Oh, my God.
Yes, sir.
How you doing, dear brother?
I'm great, thank Allah. Look, the part that really touched me was the part about the youth, the pastoral care with the youth. That we've always had a large youth population here. And as I talk to them, I'm finding a trend. And I'm guessing, when you see it in one place, it's usually everywhere. We just may not know it. But there's a huge problem amongst our youth. And you mentioned that Satan has stepped his game up. But the rampant availability of pornography on their mobile devices and whatnot. And, when I learned about it with some of the youth, it really causes a chemical change. It's almost like an addiction. But I wanted to know, have you seen that trend or had to deal with it? And do you have any suggestions for it?
I haven't really seen it here. I'm sure it is here. I haven't encountered it. But, you are touching on an important topic in terms of our youth. I was blessed to be a presenter at the Black Muslim Psychology Conference in Philadelphia back in the summer. And it was, essentially, quote unquote, African American Muslims from all of the various different communities coming together to talk about, wellness, emotional and spiritual wellness, pastoral care, these kinds of things. And it was a certain breakout session where people begin to talk about the different problems and issues that they had in their mosques and their masjids, because some of these were from the Sunni community. And I was really kind of blown away because, you know, sometimes you go through what you go through and you don't realize that, you know, a lot of the things that you're going through, other folk going through the same thing, but nobody really talks about it. And a lot of what they were sharing of the problems that they were having with their young people in the masjid, I could bear witness, we were having the same issues in the mosque. And I think that, you know, accessing pornography on electronic devices, I think those that are experimenting with smoking weed and alcohol, premarital sex, I mean, from my vantage point, it's kind of it's all in this category that really says how much emphasis we need, first of all, to study and understand the youth. If you get an opportunity, there is a great documentary that was done by Frontline for PBS, and I think it's on YouTube. You can watch it. It's called, I think, The Merchants of Cool, COOL. But it talked about how Satan has stepped his game up and how those who are the behind-the-scenes people in popular culture, in movies, music, and entertainment literally have the mindset of the same mindset and outlook as those who colonized Africa. In fact, one of the commentators specifically said that. He said they look at the youth of today like they looked at Africa. They want to colonize them, and their weaponry is movies and television and music and whatnot. And so one of the greatest challenges we have is for our youth. And I tell you how I look at it, Brother Tremont. You know, if we can't make Muslims out of people that live in our house, that eat our food, that we educate, that we feed, that we clothe, and think that we're going to go and find some random person in the street and make them a Muslim, that's really a horrible indictment, you know, on our outlook. Our children that grow up in the mosque really represent what they call in the business world low-hanging fruit. But we haven't really focused on them. You know, we would go and empty the homeless shelter and fill up the chairs in the mosque and report, you know, we had, you know, 21st timers, you know. Y'all know how we do across the country. But now we got little Aisha Muhammad. You know, we got little Malik Muhammad. You know, they're growing up in our household, and when they get to the age that they can make their own decision, they walk away from Islam. That's something that needs to be studied. One of the things that I would recommend that all of us do, because we can't solve any problem that is systemic without first studying it, is to look at, you know, some of these studies that deal with millennials. Millennials right now, from between the ages of 18 and 34, they're the largest generation here, and everybody that, you know, is in the business world, entertainment, everybody's talking about millennials. And the reason being is because they are a lot different than other generations. They're different than baby boomers. They're different than Generation X. They're a very different generation. And one of the things that you'll find among them, because when we hear the minister talk about the youth, for all intents and purposes, he's talking about this generation. And one of the things you'll find about them, Minister Tremont, is that they do not like organized religion. And they believe in God. They believe in principles, but they kind of have their own set of values and norms. In truth, what they really want is everything that the Nation of Islam teaches and stands for. But how do we represent it? In a lot of ways, sometimes our presentation of the message is very religious nowadays. Sometimes it's difficult to decipher a Muslim minister from a Baptist preacher. You know, and in the ear of the millennial generation, they lump the Muslim minister and the Baptist preacher in the same boat to be discarded. So we need to study them. I shared with Minister Willie and a few other brothers a book recommendation that Brother Carlos gave to me, which is Essie and Udum's work, Black Nationalism in America. I had seen that title come up before in research, but never read it because I wasn't studying black nationalism. So in my humble view, that book has the wrong title because it's essentially a book about the Nation of Islam. Essien Udome was a Nigerian master's student that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad gave access to do a sociological study of the Nation of Islam back in the 60s. And he wrote and he published his findings. And it's fascinating to see some of his findings from the 60s in comparison to some of the things that we deal with today. You'll see that 50 years ago, some of the organizational challenges and dynamics that Essien Udome identified in the Nation of Islam 50 years ago, we're still dealing with those same issues today. So we really need to say, what I'm saying is that problem that you're having, I would hope and pray that maybe at a certain point, you would have studied it and looked into it, that maybe you could come on this call and talk to us about how you help some of the young people in your mosque to overcome it, because I'm saying I haven't come across it in this city, but I'm not saying that because it's not a problem in this city. It just hadn't manifested itself as yet. But we have to study, what makes our youth of today different than where we were, because what solved or the solutions to problems of yesterday, we're in a different time, and we're dealing with different minds that have, as you said, developed during Satan's last-ditch effort to remain in power, where he's, not leaving any stone unturned to take away our babies. Final thing I would say on that, just to really lay pressure on our mind of the importance of our children. We all have heard that Islam is the fastest growing religion in the world. That's a statistical truth. But the thing that often we have not heard is that Islam is the fastest growing religion in the world, not solely based on people converting to Islam. Much of the reason why Islam is the fastest growing religion in the world is through sheer growth in Muslim population. In other words, Muslim people having babies. So when they count our numbers, when our children are in our home, they're counted as Muslims. But now if they grow and Satan snatches them and takes faith out of them, then maybe by the time the next census is counted, they're not in our household no more. They're part of this decadent world. So that's a little soapbox for me. That's a passion of mine. I don't want to belabor the point. I know that the time is upon us. But we have to begin to study our children so that we can do as the Honorable Elijah Muhammad taught us, put the Islam that we have in a baby bottle or in a container that they can drink it and accept it and grow into it.
Okay.
Brother Willie, am I over time? You got to let me know on the time, brother.
Yeah. I mean, it's so good, brother, and this has been the most questions that anybody has ever asked any of the speakers. So if I know those who need to get off, by all means, if you need to hang up, you can hang up. But we'll take is there any that we can take? Would you be willing to take one more question?
Brother, I'll take as many questions as you got time. I didn't know how much time you had on the call, but
Anybody else has another question?
I do,
Brother Kenneth from Rochester.
I'm sorry.
Okay,
Assalamu alaikum, Brother Demetric.
Thank you, Brother Kenneth. How are you?
Oh, I'm fine, by Allah's grace yourself, and thank you for your insight. My question is, as a study group, some of the challenges that that I've been facing, since being on the assignment and working out, is that you don't have a big staff, and just listening to how blessed Brother Anthony is to have the experience of having yourself and a few other brothers to help with the pastoral, and it's always been a challenge, since I've been in the study group, just to see prior study group coordinators and trying to pastor the brothers and sisters coming in, and then those who have been in for a while. So my question is how do, as study group coordinators, deal with those challenges in terms of being in that role as pastoral? Because, again, we don't teach like some of the student ministers have access to teach on Sunday. And I've been seeing that as a challenge as well. So how do you, kind of navigate those waters, not having that staff that you really need to have in terms of helping to develop new people and also believers who have been in the study group for a while? I guess that's my question.
That's a good question, Brother Ken. It's good to hear your voice. I got to come back to Rochester, brother.
Yes, sir.
But I would just say the only thing that any of us can do, brother, is to work with what we have.
Yes, sir.
And I think that as time goes on, Allah will bless you with what you need, in all areas of that beautiful group of believers that's in Rochester. You are a beautiful brother who have a beautiful spirit, and I so thoroughly enjoy spending time with you that I feel very confident that whatever efforts you are making to pastor the believers and to be available during that time of need, I just know they appreciate it, because again, so much about pastoral care is just being available. It ain't about, knowing how to counsel somebody. It ain't about having the right words to say. It's just, as the old saying goes, 90% of success is showing up. And I think that, probably your challenge is the believers having more needs than you yourself have the time to be present at. And so, they can see that and they know that. But as time goes on, you just have to identify people that can help you on your staff. And, again, don't hesitate to lean upon the elders, if they are of sound mind. And, the scripture, Paul talks about the qualifications for a bishop, and talks about the qualifications for a minister. Look at that. And, because all elders ain't the same. I'm not saying that, but, in many cases, they can be of help to us in just, trying to help us eat that elephant, and as the minister told me, the way we teach, should also always be in a way that empowers the believing men and women to know that we have a mighty God. We have been given supreme wisdom, that Islam is mathematics, and we are empowered to solve whatever problems that we have. I don't want anyone to interpret that I'm trying to say that, the believers should be dependent upon their student minister to be at their beck and call. Not saying that at all, because all of us have our own life. We have a family, and we sometimes, as the minister says, every preacher needs a preacher. So sometimes we need pastoral care. But we find that if we can cause the believer's experience in the mosque to be rewarding, to be peaceful, to be pleasant, that will not only help the believer, but it also will help us in the metrics that we are governed on by our headquarters. So I would just say, my brother, do the best that you can in working with what you have, and, there are a lot of things that you could do as an individual, if you think about it, maybe if you knew, for instance, important dates. This is just an example, oversimplified example. But maybe if you knew some of the important dates in the lives of the believers, anniversaries, graduation dates, birth dates, even though we don't celebrate birthdays, if the believer received a card, just as an acknowledgement from their student minister, I understand this is your anniversary. We thank Allah for you and your husband and your wonderful family. Assalamu alaikum. May Allah continue to bless you. I know I can only speak for myself. When I receive that kind of stuff, as corny as it is, I appreciate it. Especially if it's coming from someone that I respect and admire, because I said, oh, they remembered me. I was on their mind. I think it was Brother Tremont, and you'll appreciate this, Brother Tremont, but I was kind of down in the dumps maybe a couple months ago, and a brother called me, and he told me that the minister had just mentioned me to him, and it was like my whole world had changed. It's like, I felt 1,000% better just because I was on the mind of my minister. I said, well, all hope certainly is not lost, because right. I was on his mind in a good way. And then in our respective communities, even though sometimes they may not say it, but the believers really do look up to their student minister. And so that's the kind of thing that where if you just had those dates and you put them in your computer or you put them on your phone, maybe you don't send a card, maybe you just give a phone call. If you got a smartphone, you open up your calendar, and now you plugging in dates that are important to the believers. So now when your calendar reminds you, oh, this is Saeed's birthday, oh, this is when Saeed first graduated or whatever, you just give them a call or even shoot them a text, just an acknowledgement, because, again, pastoral care is not just about I got to put out all the fires that the believers get themselves into and blah, 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 but sometimes just a kind word and acknowledgement that, hey, I'm a human being, and they're not just always calling me. The mosque is not just always calling me or contacting me because they need something or they want something, but they acknowledge my existential value as a human being, as a believer. And, in pastoral care, what I have found, a little bit goes a long way.
Yes, sir. Thank you, brother. I appreciate it.
Thank you, brother. Definitely. I appreciate it. Yes, sir.
Brother, we'll take one more question. There's a Sister Lilia wanted to ask the question.
Of course.
Alaikum, sir.
Wa alaikum salam, ma'am.
It wasn't a question, but it was actually the thank you for mentioning the youth, because many times I was in charge of the youth during the week, because they would tend to go into one of the classrooms during the lecture, and the minister would ask me to bring them out, whether they had homework or not, to bring them out so that they can hear, and so that the lecture could be affected towards them. And I noticed that in Oakland, they take all the phones from everybody except the officials, so that the children won't go off in one of the classrooms to talk on there or get on there and look at apps or whatever. But I do know that our youth do need help, because being one of the teachers in Oakland for the last 13 years, I came to New Orleans in the 13th year of my teaching there to take care of my parents-in-law, but the children would use me as a soundboard, because the young believers, they watch us. They do want positions, but they watch us, and they see us make mistakes and errors, and they don't take it lightly. And they would, use me as a sounding board. They want to know. And I would definitely have to be on my post as a believer and a teacher. And I would have to use the scriptures to help them try to understand. Because when they're watching us and they want to take our positions, and they become dissatisfied when they see us make mistakes or errors. And I have to, give them a pat on their back and let them know that we're human beings, and that they can speak to the believer when they see them making an error, but they have to use respectful language so that they won't feel like that you as a child or a young child growing up being out of place. But I really appreciate you bringing that to the table, because that's very, very important, especially when they want to be in not in our position, but take a post. And thank you again, sir.
No, thank you, dear sister. I'm very passionate about that because, our young people, we make an investment in them. And, from a business standpoint, they always talk about this concept of ROI, return on investment. So it should pain us as a nation. You invest 18 years worth of bean soup and 18 years worth of parenting, 18 years worth of taking them to the mosque, feeding them, clothing. They grew up in your house, and I know I have been guilty of this. We think that they're going to get Islam through osmosis, just through being in the environment, and we never stop to deliberately focus on, have I converted my son? Have I converted my daughter? And you see it a lot in social media, where our young people who are X or who are Muhammad or who are Shabazz or who are Shah or who are Aziz or whatever their holy name is, but they are hardly sometimes distinguishable from the secular world. And we have to take responsibility for that, because we have been busy seeking to save the world, and sometimes we have lost our household, and it makes making the metrics that we are governed by all the more difficult, because if you have a household of 5 people in it, a FOI, an MGT, and their 3 children, that should be 5 believers. Those 3 children should grow up, and in an ideal scenario, now you have 3 more people who contribute in charity, 3 more people to hold posts, 3 more people to do the things that we do in our nation. But instead, we are so outwardly focused, on saving the man and woman in the gutter, which they need to be saved. I'm not saying ignore that, but I believe that there is room in our approach and in our efforts to do both. I don't think it's a case of either or. It's a case of and both, so that we can pass the baton to them. But we have to, as you pointed, or as you alluded to, Sister Lillian, they're not like us, and we can't think that they're like us. And we weren't like our parents, and in a lot of ways, they're more unlike us than we were unlike our parents. And so that's why I encourage that we study our young people, so that we find the best means of approach to winning their hearts and minds, because they have been born during the period of time where organized religion is dying. Think about what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad told the minister. He said Christianity would die a natural death. He said the old world of Islam would also die, and the only thing that would be left would be the principles. So these young people aren't wrong for disdaining organized religion. This is the time where man's worship of God evolves into man becoming one with God. And so they were born for this time. And if we teach and represent Islam to them as a religion, we won't be able to maintain their interest, and we won't be able to get their participation going forward. So we really need to nationally, and I hope that as time goes on, this can become a priority on our national things to do list. I wrote the minister about it, and he liked what I had to say about it, and he agreed with it. He and I plan to talk more about it in the days to come. But it's a real crisis for us that I am not sure all of us have an appreciation for. But I thank you for your comments, and I thank Student Minister Willie for the honor and the privilege. I apologize if I went over time. Charge it to my head and not to my heart, as Jesse Jackson would say, Minister Willie.
Minister, all praise is due to Allah. But I think it really shows, as we've talked before, that calls like this are needed, and more extensive training like this is needed, because you've shared a lot it has helped me in the capacity I'm in, and I know it has helped many others. So what I would ask, like I always ask all of those who are on the call, please send me a text with some words talking about what you got from tonight's call. Send me a text messages. If you got to send me more than one, send it. Please make sure you send some words out, because we're always interested in feedback, and from the feedback, it helps us to see where we can go next. So thank you all. The next call, if I'm not mistaken, is going to be on February the 9th, and it's the Western Student Regional Minister, Brother Tony Muhammad from Los Angeles. He's going to be talking about how to set goals for your mosque and your study group. How to set goals for your mosque and your study group. And I'll be sending you out some information, the information to read before that particular series, that particular part of this series. And I've already sent you all out the PowerPoint information from Brother Demetric. And I'll also send you all out a copy of this audio, the audio from tonight. But Brother Demetric, thank you, brother. And may Allah continue to bless you. And I'll make sure that I forward you all feedback and also a copy of this audio as well. But thank you, brother. This was really, really, really beneficial.
Thank you, Brother William. Thank everyone for taking time out of their busy schedules to be with us tonight. I really, really do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Salam.
Brother Willie?
Yes, sir.
This is Brother James again, dear brother. Are you going to be in Jacksonville Saturday?
Yes, sir. I'll be Jacksonville Saturday through the conflict resolution, and inshallah teaching Sunday.
Okay, very good. I'll see you there, inshallah, dear brother. Also, I'll see you there, and we'll talk further then, inshallah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, my brothers and sisters, everybody who was on.
Assalamu alaikum.